Thanks everyone for joining us. My name is Bill Lucia. I am executive editor for Government Executives Route 50. Route 50 covers state and local government news and trends all across the country. You can find us at route50.com, all spelled out just like the road. We're here this morning talking about regional cooperation on smart cities projects, why it makes sense and why it can be difficult sometimes. It's a really interesting conversation to have right now, especially given the regional emphasis with some of the new federal grant programs that are out there under the infrastructure law as well as the American Rescue Plan. On paper, regional cooperation makes a lot of sense. Projects, contracting, and so forth are often more efficient at scale. But it can also be challenging. There's often more stakeholders at the table, more decision makers involved. There can be competing policy priorities across communities. And it can also get tricky when it comes to mixing streams of funding. We've got a great panel today from all across the country to dive into some of these issues and how they're playing out on the ground in their communities. Anna Chammas did I say your last name right?
Yes.
Okay, sorry.
Yes.
Is from Miami-Dade County. Jennifer Sanders is with us. She's the executive director of the North Texas Innovation Alliance. And Grace Simrall is the Chief Information Officer for Louisville, Kentucky. So to kick things off, I think I'll have each of the panelists just give kind of a brief intro about the work they do at their organization and kind of a little bit of an overview of the region where they're based. So Anna, since we're on your home turf, maybe you can kick things off.
Yes, I'm so happy to be on my home turf. So welcome so much to this incredible Smart City event. Smart City is at the heart of everything that I love to do. My name is Anna Chammas. I am the Director of Innovation. I work directly under the Office of the Mayor and the Chief Information Officer of Miami-Dade County, which is right over there, Margaret Brisbane. I see Maria Elena. Hi, everyone. So we're doing some incredible work around Smart City, and we're very excited. We really want to drive everything that has to do with open data, data sharing, and true collaboration across jurisdictional lines, ensuring that we have access and inclusivity in the community.
Thanks.
Hi, everybody. I'm Jen Sanders. I'm the executive director of the North Texas Innovation Alliance, and we're a freestanding nonprofit. So we have cross-sector partners that come together around this North Star of really a holistic definition of smart city or smart region, which is how do we find the intersection point between technology, data, and community to improve quality of life, economic development, resource efficiencies. I just realized that tomorrow is actually the 7-year birthday of Dallas Innovation Alliance, which was the first organization that we launched, which feels like 6 months ago and also 40 years ago. There's been so much going on. But the regional initiative is really meant to do exactly what we're talking about today. We can move, we're a neutral host, if you will, so we can bring everybody into the room, and we can move outside of formal procurement to an extent in terms of piloting, and so we can move rather quickly. And we've got 36 members, about 2/3 are public sector or agency, and then we've got private, academic, and civic that all come together, and I know we'll talk more about the focus areas soon, but grateful to be here.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Grace Simrall. I'm the Chief of Civic Innovation and Technology for Louisville Metro Government, which is the consolidated city-county government of Louisville, Kentucky. And I want to take the opportunity, because we are in Miami, and a lot of people, of course, are enjoying the hospitality. But for those who aren't familiar with Louisville, we are the largest city in the Commonwealth of Kentucky, 750,000 people. And while we don't have beaches, we do have another B word, and that is bourbon. So we tell people 99% of the world's bourbon is in Kentucky, and the rest is counterfeit. So if you want to enjoy our hospitality and bourbon, please do take a visit to Louisville, Kentucky.
All right, thanks everyone for those intros. So to get things started, maybe we can talk about specific projects that are going on in each of your regions that either involve cooperation across jurisdictions, or if there aren't many you can think of, where you think those types of projects or collaboration could make sense. Anna, do you want to go first?
Yeah. So we are one of the primary sponsors of this event today is Knight Foundation, and we are very grateful to the work that we do with Knight Foundation. Knight Foundation is actually spearheading with us several projects. One of them is very near and dear to my heart, working with US Ignites. We're really going to look, and I see Eric back there. I met with him the other day about that. We're going to be looking at going across municipalities. We want to create interconnected communities. We want to make sure that everything that we put out is interoperable, where we have interconnected networks and streetlights and sensors, where we're really moving the community. We are looking at how we can drive and move the needle on climate and our traffic patterns and pollution. And the only way to do that is if we work across all jurisdictional lines, whether it is a municipality, whether it's a city or a town, whether it's the state, because I know that, Grace has to really deal with that, and she'll talk about that. So it's just very exciting to do that, and looking at a way that we can integrate data and share data is going to be the biggest work that I think we need to get done locally to really move the needle on becoming a true smart city in the 21st century.
So I think, and to your point at the inset, where sometimes competing priorities, don't allow for the investments to be made cross-jurisdiction. And I think what we saw in the pandemic is we had a unified cause that everyone had to fix in a short term, one of which being broadband. And so there's a couple of projects regionally that we're really excited about and proud to have been a partner of. One is there are some smaller towns called the Lake Cities, but they formed a four-way ILA, four-way RFP, and they are about to break ground in the next couple of months. But they just put the RFP out through an alternative method called marketplace.city. And so they listed it in October, I believe, of last year. They're breaking ground very, very soon. And that, to me, they sometimes say to me, but we're tiny. And I said, this model is what everyone is trying to do. I said, you are setting a precedent that other cities, regions, states can take away. And so, that's one project. Also, like many other parts of the country, the Operation Connectivity came together that included, 12 school districts, 12 cities, foundations, and really said, at the inset of the pandemic, how do you hit that goal, right? Hotspots, but not losing sight of the midterm, long-term solutions, because hotspots necessary, not going to get us 20 years from now. And then the other crisis, right, was the grid. We had a little storm that really highlighted some needs from a there can be arguments to be made about the state level, but what we did is we came together and I said, I don't want to talk about state level stuff that's out of our control. What did we learn locally that we can do better responding to an emergency, looking at resilient infrastructure? And so that has led to some really interesting insights and projects across emergency management, and a massive project that we're planning right now that I can talk about later. People will think I'm crazy, which is a good thing.
Looking forward to hearing about that.
Anna alluded to this, but again, Louisville, Kentucky shares a border with southern Indiana. So the Ohio River splits the two states. And so our region, in fact, has to reach across state boundaries. And I think that that's a really important part of the conversation that we usually don't spend time talking about. When we measure outcomes, we're frequently measuring in terms of a metropolitan statistical area. That includes not just collar counties to the south of Louisville, but again, also counties that are in southern Indiana. And so whether it was our public health response to the COVID-19 pandemic, workforce development patterns, transportation needs of, again, the workforce, it's very important for us to have a strong partnership with those in the larger region to be able to achieve the outcomes we want.
And what do you all think are some of the risks or downsides of failing to cooperate across regions? I mean, what can happen if that kind of cooperation is not taking place with the types of projects that you work on?
If I could jump in real quick,
Sure.
I think that we're talking a lot about equity at this conference. And oftentimes in our larger regional areas, it's those collar regions, those edge neighborhoods that are the most vulnerable and those that have been historically marginalized and left behind. And so if we're intentional and serious about equity, we absolutely need to then work to address that. Otherwise, we're just going to repeat the mistakes of the past and continue to, in fact, widen the disparities that our larger region and communities face.
So to jump on the equity conversation, which is enormously critical, Dallas has a housing crisis from an affordability standpoint, and so the housing employment mismatch for transit-dependent individuals in our population are causing an inability for them to keep their jobs, and it's not their fault. It's because the bus was late or because something happened there, and a lot of that 30% of the region crosses at least one county line every single day in North Texas, and so when we talk about how do we look at the continuum of equity and access to opportunity, that includes all the drivers of poverty, that includes beyond that includes broadband. And so if we're not looking at an integrated continuum, not just within issue, but within jurisdictions, we're never going to get there. And the other risk with the large federal investments, I would say, is I, alongside probably many in this area, wake up in the middle of the night afraid that we're not going to spend that money as strategically as we could. And so if we make a huge investment and it's not compatible and standardized across city or county lines, you're going to have to go back. You're not going to get the full impact and ROI of those investments, and that would be a tragedy.
Yeah, a perfect example of that, our mayor has actually created an Office of Innovation and Economic Development. That we have a chief. I work within that office also. And one of the major things we're doing is we are developing an innovation economic development plan. We will be talking about it. I'm going to be talking to her a lot about the alliance and everything they're doing, because it's absolutely spectacular. So I feel very lucky to be on this panel with all of you. We are looking at not only bringing together carriers, academic partners, all governments to come together to really look at local technology planning teams around our broadband initiative. If we don't come together, the state will not trickle the money down to us. So, we were talking when we met last time about the NSF grant. That had to be a super regional effort, right? So if we're looking for dollars, we need alliances like yours that help convene all of the different people and bring everyone together. Because if we don't do these things together, we're not going to get anything done. The money is not coming to us unless we don't work together.
Anna, at the top, you mentioned data sharing, and that seems like an area that can be a key stumbling block when it comes to regional projects, just making sure that data can be shared across places, making sure that systems are set up to allow for that. Can you talk a little more about that? Any work that's going on here in Miami-Dade to help make that process smoother?
Sure. So first and foremost, recently the board took an action to put together a resolution that is going to require all municipalities to share data around public safety and gun violence. That is extremely critical for us to reduce gun violence as a whole, and it is going to be a precedent that has never been set, where we are literally going to be collecting data and creating standards, and the Office of the CIO is actually going to be developing an intake form that brings all of that data together. And with that idea and with that precedent, we are going to work with the UX Ignites team, and we are going to create a governance model, standard model, integration components where we can put it in an open data environment, and we can let everyone have access to that data, so that not only do we build trust in government, but that we collaborate. I want to just reiterate over and over again, if we're not working together, we're not collaborating, and we're actually competing and butting heads, we're not going to get anything done as a region. And this region is made up of 34 municipalities, and so although we're not crossing state lines, it is 34 different cities, 34 different leaders, 34 different interests, and then one greater Miami-Dade County. And that's why I think the Office of Innovation and Economic Development needed to come to play, because we needed to see how we can use those data elements to help small businesses grow, to work with the CIO, to streamline the processes, the applications that we build, to really drive those things, So, and then we're going to be building an alliance, and it's going to be a local alliance. And the first city I approached was the city of Miami, and that's why I pointed to Eric back there, because it's something I'm really passionate about. And I think one by one we will tackle that, and together we will create an incredible local alliance.
So I want to give a shout out to San Antonio and Bexar County, who I don't think I've seen anyone yet, but they need but they created an 8-way data sharing agreement across utilities, across school districts, community colleges, city, county, et cetera. And I think, I forget how long that took them to come together, but they did it, and they so freely share what that process looked like and what those agreements look like. And that to me is like a bonkers undertaking. Just skip all the way to 8, right? So I think that's huge. And I think all of the things that you mentioned, but I think, one use case that I've seen that I just think is really interesting is around interventions around those that are close to homelessness. And so if you look at things like overdue utility bills, that can be an indicator that you're starting to get one paycheck away. If you look at, if you're able to use data to really pre-identify and be able to intervene and help folks to avoid that transition and then all the problems associated with. But data is necessary. Machine learning is necessary in order to be able to be successful in that.
I think what's so interesting is that we're talking a lot about this, and let's just acknowledge measuring things is hard. It is hard work.
Especially when you don't have a baseline because you've never done it before.
So how do you measure something new? I think you certainly try and look for proxy information, and that's very useful. But then kind of the holy grail for us, right, is to find leading indicators. Are there things that give us a signal that give us some predictive power? So we're not always looking in the rearview mirror and saying, oh, well, sure, that's what happened 5 years ago. And so I think what's so promising about let's talk about smart city conversation, is that we are, again, through partnerships and through this collective, collaborative effort to learn together, figuring out how to do that. So I would be remiss without saying, besides having alliances, it's also very useful to have policies in place. And so the city of Louisville in 2013 was among the first cities to adopt by executive order an open data by default policy. And just 2 weeks ago, we codified it into an ordinance, so it is now law. Any data that is collected by the city or collected on behalf of the city, unless it is sensitive, classified sensitive or protected, is open by default. And so making sure that that's in place, we just migrated our open data portal to a new robust platform so that we can have better tools for citizens to, again, not just have raw data, but also visualize and take action on it. And I want to stress that having policy, having tools, and having community engagement around this is also so important.
Well, that's the only way it transcends election cycles, too, and priorities changing is that codification. Congratulations.
Yeah, I completely agree, too.
What's some of the data that's available under the open data policy, just to give a little flavor for the audience?
Sure. All 26 agencies within Louisville Metro government participate, so it's everything from decades of 311 data. We have literally 30 years worth of 311 data that's out there. Emergency runs, fire runs, code violations, restaurant inspections. And in fact, because we make this available on open data, platforms like Yelp are able to just automatically incorporate them through an API directly into their platform and make it useful. We have things like planned road closures, so that apps like Waze can incorporate it directly into their app and make it more valuable to our residents and visitors. There really is just the breadth of data that's available out there is astonishing.
Sure. Yeah, the problem at this point, it seems like there's plenty of data available. It's more what to do with it. Before we move on talking about data, just are there any specific stumbling blocks you'd point to when it comes to collaborate or when it comes to data sharing between jurisdictions? Like where are the actual failure points there? What makes it so difficult specifically?
Well, what we're going to tackle with the project with US Ignites primarily is to create a standardization so that there is a way that our data can interconnect. So if we create standard forms in which we all collect certain types of data that are important to the community. So if it's, for us to be able to study traffic patterns, or for us to over here heat is major. So for us to really look at heat index across the community and then lay all of that into some sort of data platform that can be shared amongst all the communities, right? So whether it's permitting, we have the assistant director over the whole area that's over our GIS. We layer all our open data over GIS. So we're able to not just analyze, we can map it, we can analyze where we have like hotspots and issues or things that we really need to make some informed decisions about. Like, Grace was saying, it's, we can look back and say hindsight's 2020, but really we gotta look forward and we gotta be really proactive about doing something for tomorrow, right? So whether it's for broadband equity or whether it's looking at anything that makes our community smart, because like the mayor and the Secretary of State, what they were talking about that's super critical for us is the reality is that we're not smart if we're not inclusive. And we're only gonna be as good as what we can analyze in that data, identify deserts and connectivity for broadband, or where we might have underserved communities that aren't connected, where we might have lacking transportation, which is our major engagement component. And then once we are an inclusive community, we can really do the meaningful work of this data sharing, standardization, governance, policies, and all of that work.
I think that's fantastic. And, when we talk about, again, why the collaboration is so key, I think maybe I'm stating the obvious here, but we strongly believe that talent is evenly distributed and opportunity is not. Meaning that there are people in our community who have insights that we don't have. We shouldn't be filled with so much hubris to say, well, we're the experts. All of us municipal folk, we're the experts, and we know best. We'll tell you what you need. Instead, acknowledge there are a lot of fantastic ideas out there. And again, things that we would never see that's buried in that data. And so I think, really interesting that we talk about, again, these regions, these collaborations, that, again, we've got to make sure that seated at the table is, in fact, those in our community who want to work on this with us.
Well, and I think something that I want to make sure and reiterate is we not lose track of the qualitative insights as well as we look at this, because I know that when we were starting to plan our equity-focused projects a couple of years ago, I took in a heat map of all the 911 calls into a community, and I said, does this look right to you? And they said, yeah, kind of, but this corridor, I never let my kid walk home from school down, but there were no hotspots there. And I said, why? And she said, we don't bother calling 911. It takes too long. There's retribution. We don't believe that the police are going to show up, which speaks to a whole nother set of issues. And I think one of the biggest barriers also is different stages of readiness across jurisdiction. If you have a 20-year-old ERP system as a starting point, or 30 in some cases, right, you're never going to be able to actively participate until you catch up. And so one of the goals of the NTXIA is that cities that are prime and ahead of the curve, that they can share with these cities that need to come further along so they can move faster, and even better if there's piggyback contracts that allow those to go through more quickly. But until we get everybody at some level of readiness to participate in the cleansing and the ingestion and all of the things that we need to do, then we're never going to get there.
Yeah, that's actually a nice segue into something else I wanted to talk about. Scale can be a real advantage with projects, whether it's the project itself or with contracting, purchasing agreements, et cetera. And so, with the wide range of communities, in terms of size that you work with, Jennifer, how do you see like the smaller communities being helped along when they work alongside larger communities that maybe are more sophisticated, or, just the power of having a group of, governments working together on something?
Well, and I think it goes both ways, like I was mentioning with the small communities that came together on broadband, but it really is about, it's really just about the peer-to-peer sharing and the willingness to be open and transparent about what worked and what didn't. And obviously that what didn't is often more important, in terms of starting, and then lessons learned and redoing things at a high expense later can be avoided, as a first piece. And, we have communities as small as 2,500 in the NTXIA. We have, the region as a whole is going to become the third largest metro within the next 5 years. And so we have that ability, and I think that in terms of catching folks up quickly and looking at that, that's where the MPO, which we call the Council of Governments, really comes into play, and their ability to wrangle, also distribute funding that crosses the region at the inset. So much of it is just, here's what I did, here's the product I used. Sometimes that product is now sunset, and they've learned that, and now what do we do otherwise? And but again, it's the more candid folks are with each other, the quicker that happens.
Anything you wanted to add on that, Grace or Anna? Or?
I mean, I think that there's also something to be said, not just being able to piggyback on contracts, but also the collective buying power, right? That's really oftentimes a barrier to entry for smaller communities. Certainly, Louisville, which is, again, a consolidated city-county government, does have 82 small cities within it still. And those individual small cities, which are, some of them are no bigger than a homeowners association, they would not be able to participate in, for example, procuring resources for our larger emergency services 911 system, right? Our computer-aided dispatch. So making sure that we have a collective buying power to be able to have them participate in a meaningful way is really important.
Can I talk about one more thing? Sorry. So in addition to data, we talk about things like standardization and permitting or trenching, and I mean, even, within one of our municipalities that did a citywide fiber, every home, every business, I said, what was the biggest challenge in getting through legal and getting through things? And she said, ultimately, getting across the finish line, we had some neighborhoods with PD overlays where you could micro trench, and 100 yards later, it had to be 18 inches, and we had to find ways to streamline that so we could even do this, she said. But once we got through the financial piece, she goes, you wouldn't believe how long that took just to make sure they could actually have the engineering design that they needed. So anyway, it's a whole nother cross-jurisdictional standardization issue.
Yeah, no, it's a really good point, because I mean, we're here talking about smart cities, but the issue you raised there is a more general one. I mean, that affects all kinds of projects, right? I mean, even if you're trying to build a road or something like that. So, another area that is interesting here is funding. So when it comes to mixing funding streams across governments, I mean, that can be complicated. Anything you're seeing there in terms of trends? I mean, with some of the federal grant programs emphasizing regional cooperation, are you seeing more of a willingness in your regions to fund things collaboratively or talk about mixed funding sources, or is it there's still a long way to go there?
I think the NSF grant is a fantastic example, and I think that Jen could talk a little bit about that too. But for us, we really approached it from a broad community perspective, and it was a super region. It was from Monroe all the way to Orlando, and for us, that's half our state. And they're the biggest cities. They're the most highly populated parts of our state. And so putting all of those groups together and bringing together and creating a climate engine around everything that all of those different communities are tackling and finding that united voice has been something that is going to enable us. We're already in the second round, so it's very exciting because we took that collective approach that we're actually going to see the dollars infused within our state, and that's a very exciting thing for us. And I think you had shared a little bit about the NSF also.
No, absolutely, and necessity drives, the mother of invention and trying things differently, and with more and more of the federal funds requiring that there be regional and multi-jurisdictional. I mean, that's a great way to set the stage. And I think with the NSF, I remember, and this is not directly related to us, but I remember the webinar for those moving on to the second round. They kind of showed a map of clusters of applications, and there were certain areas that had dozens coming out of the same region, and it was not a slight, but did say, we want to reiterate that the purpose of this was to really minimize the number coming out from a region and encouraging for the next phase that they were allowed and certainly encouraged to combine some of those. And so that it's a key learning, and it just reiterates that that is the direction that we need to go, and that is being supported by federal funding. But I think picking where we're most ready as a region, what's the highest priority, and do we already have a coalition? North Texas is severe non-attainment now with air quality. We just got downgraded, which is heartbreaking. But that, again, is a catalyst for everyone to come together and say, not only do we need to move faster, we need to do more than we were already planning to do. So, yeah.
Anything you wanted to add, Grace? Or?
No, I mean, I think that between the EDA's Build Back Better Regional Challenge grants, NSF's Innovation Engines Challenge grants, these are grants that are great for cities. They're great for regions. And I stress that because, again, it doesn't have to be an either or. It doesn't have to be urban versus rural. We absolutely can work together, and we should be working together, because the reality is people live, work, play across these regions. And so acknowledging that our lives are not bound by county lines, instead have this glorious spillover, should be reflected, in fact, in how the federal funds are distributed.
There's so many ways we're talking about regional cooperation and why it makes more sense than working in silos as individual governments. But I mean, what do you see in some of your regions as just the biggest roadblocks over the years to making it happen? I mean, is it just that individual governments aren't talking to one another? Is it?
It's like the elephant in the room, but there's almost like this competitive nature from government to government, from carrier to carrier, whether it's a fiscal, financial competition, or it's one government doing something faster than the other, and that just doesn't work anymore. It just simply doesn't. Like the ladies were talking, there are underserved communities that sit in pockets or municipalities in our area, which are cities that don't have the money. They need to leverage that economies of scale, that we can, as a larger government, bring people in, bring them into the fold, and then share those things with the smaller communities. But if we have ego, we're not going to get there. We really aren't.
I mean, I think it's all about incentives. And so the financial incentives were aligned in such a way that we didn't view each other as competitors, but rather collaborators. It resolves the issue. The nice thing, at least for those who, oftentimes there is no money. I mean, so because there's no money, we're actually incentivized, in fact, to work together and across the country, across the globe, because ultimately this public sector work, it's not a zero-sum game, right? If Miami-Dade succeeds, that doesn't take away from Louisville. It's good for all of us. And so I am pleased to see that there's a recognition that if you want to achieve these outcomes, then you need to align the incentives.
And I think what's interesting just in general in starting regional collaboration is one of the first functions that gets it is economic development. One of the functions that is most incentivized to be a little bit more protective is economic development. And I get it, and so reconciling the momentum that you get from, like, we get it. We all need the infrastructure to attract, to retain, et cetera, with that balance of who's the neutral convener that looks at it through that lens. And when we started kind of pitching, we needed a regional thing. I knew which city was going to raise their hand and be like, we'll lead it. And I said, no, you won't. People aren't going to show up if there's one of you. So the neutrality is a really big piece.
Yeah, and I mean, the work that your group does, Jennifer, I mean, you guys play a kind of crucial role in sort of breaking down some of the barriers that might exist to working across government. I mean, any other thoughts on, why groups like yours or academic institutions are kind of key conveners or go-betweens when it comes to working across governments?
I mean, we sure try, but a lot of it is just convening and matchmaking, right? And in terms of getting everybody in a room. And so I think that, I think that neutrality, I think people being able to come to the table across sector and know, one of the things I failed to mention is, our members, when they join on the public sector side, it says in writing that private sector folks, by the nature of just of them participating, are not precluded from subsequent RFPs that come out, and that again allows for the candor and the ability to have some protection on both sides. And so I think that that's one piece. But I do just think that the neutrality and being able to connect dots, because no city or municipality has too much time, too much money, too many people. And so my entire function is to zoom out and try and connect dots across all of these things and just be aware of and map that. So things that people aren't seeing, not because they don't want to connect the dots, because they don't know there are dots to connect. Sometimes just being able to highlight those, because I say, consider me kind of another arm and leg, because all I do, you have time like 5% of the time. This is my entire function, right, is to do that. So that's part of the hope there.
Yeah, I honestly believe that what Jen is doing in Texas is something that should be replicated here locally, and I feel blessed to have been on this panel and to have met her and Grace and you, because I want to take all those ideas, and I love that she said, take them, and I'm going to share with you what San Antonio's done, and let's, and I think that spirit of helping each other is something that it will go, it'll be something that almost becomes contagious, right? And that's what pumps me up. That's that sweet spot that makes me excited about the work we do. And so I congratulate you, because that is not easy work. And I really want to do that over here locally. It's so exciting.
We'll all help you. And number one, you are far too generous. And we learn too, there's precedents set around the country. And I think a couple of folks are in the room, are certainly here. And Aaron Deacon in Kansas City is another example. The Connective in Phoenix, I think Ben is here, is another. And we actually created a national Smart Coalitions partnership for organizations like ours to do exactly what we're doing individually. And there's great precedent to be set within this structure as well.
So another thing that's come up a couple times so far in the conversation is broadband. In your regions, how built out is how big are the gaps that are left in the broadband network, and how much of a problem is that when you're talking about, smart cities style collaborations on projects?
So we're working on an incredible program with Miami Foundation. It's called Miami Connected. And from that whole entire effort and study and having to put together a report for the CIO to the report to the state, what we really found is that we have issues more with education, adoption, and trust. Is the county and the region fully covered? Maybe not. There might be small gaps in different places that we need to work on with the carriers to make sure that they're able to get the dollars to be able to expand. But really, honestly and truly, if we don't try to build more trust in government and us work together to educate those underserved communities, they're not going to adopt this connectivity, and it's going to still leave a gap. And that's quite sad.
I think we have two challenges, right? So we have the challenge around the digital divide, which affects our residents very directly. And we can talk about residential service and where there are gaps. I mean, certainly Louisville's done a lot of work around mapping. And at this point, we're pretty confident that we know where people are unserved. And we have a number. We have funding to try and address that number. But addressing the digital divide for our residents is a different conversation than the smart city of the future, which is municipal fiber that is leveraged to connect devices and sensors to be able then to leverage to achieve outcomes for our residents. And so the city has certainly done a lot of work even prior to the pandemic of building out that network. There's more to be built out. I think if the future is connected and autonomous, and we don't want to leave communities behind, we need to have a lot of intentionality around the middle mile fiber investments in the underserved portions of the community, but also share with them why that's important. I mean, prior to the pandemic, I had many conversations with residents who were very upset about 5G. They thought that 5G was going to give them cancer. And I said, well, first, that's Russian propaganda. Two, the reason why the Russians are doing that is that's their only tactic, is to just delay. And what's going to happen is that you're going to be left behind in your neighborhoods like you've always been. So that's why we're fighting for you to be prioritized to get small cell service. And again, making sure that we are transparent and available and meet people where they are so that we can build that trust so that they're not left behind.
Oh, yay. So, but I think, no, that's a major point too in the planning, to be able to look at both use cases, for lack of a better term, not in parallel, but intersected. So if you look at it from two perspectives, how are you serving residents and how are you improving city services? Those are not, those shouldn't be looked at separately, right? Because then you're gonna lose some of the functionality. And I think in our area, we have found that it is more of an adoption problem, an education problem than availability. That doesn't mean that everyone has last mile to their home. It does mean that they are in close enough proximity with a reasonable speed that adoption piece. And so we have a program called Connected Dallas that I can dive more into later. We don't have time, but it's really focused on how do you meet the community in any channel, anywhere they are, because less than 7% of the residents that don't have internet in Dallas, or I'm sorry, only 7% of those without internet in Dallas even knew that affordable programs existed, even knew that the Affordable Connectivity Program existed. And here, the unfortunate thing, I'm very blessed that we got the funding gap closed last month with some generous donations to be able to do this program. The larger challenge, I think, for cities is that is the hardest thing to convince people to fund, is the on the ground. We're not laying infrastructure. You can't see it. We need to fund people and CBOs to be able to do the work, to get in front of their neighbors and in front of their communities and walk them through. It takes 25 minutes a person to walk them through the ACP eligibility process. And that's if they already have the documentation they need. And I'm like, you're telling me that you want to cut the $2 million allocated to $500,000 because you think we should be doing something else? We're never going to close this. And so, again, the hardest things to fund are often the most important to fill those gaps.
Yeah, no, it seems like very important work. So that's,
We're at 0.
yeah, we're out of time. I'm looking at the timer, and
We may have been at zero for God knows
Yeah.
how long. Sorry, guys.
So thanks to our panelists and thanks to our audience, and enjoy the rest of the conference.